Welcome to meeting number 42 of the Standing Committee on International Trade. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, September 18, 2025, the committee is resuming a study of Canada in the forthcoming CUSMA review. Before I start with the witnesses, I have two motions, one from Mr. Chambers and one from Ms. Akan, that I believe there has been discussion amongst the members on both of those motions. In particular, on Mr. Chambers' motion, before you all are aware of it, is there any suggested amendments to or anything to Mr. Chambers' motion? Okay, Mr. Navke, please.
Thank you, Chair. So, Mr. Chambers and I have been discussing. I have a slight modification that I'm suggesting to his motion, and that is in the very last sentence, which would read now that the committee report its findings to the House, semicolon, and that, comma, pursuant to Standing Order 109, comma, the committee requests that the government table a comprehensive response to the report, period. That's the only change, absolutely. And I believe Mr. Chambers is in agreement to that.
There's another line you're striking.
Guess he's not.
We struck out the line which suggested that this study will take precedent over other studies. Thank you, Mr. Chambers.
That I accept that as a friendly amendment.
Right?
It's been said to the clerk, should be in clerk's inbox. The edited version.
Are you okay with this?
Yeah. If the committee's fine with it.
Okay, everybody's okay with that friendly amendment to Mr. Chambers' motion, and we have Ms. Akan's Ms. Lapointe.
Can we receive it, the amendment, because you're speaking in English and I'm not sure about the last sentence in French. Okay, merci. Okay, but if it's possible, it's okay. I'm not sure about the amendment. That's why.
Yeah, the amendment is just keeping it in with the proper language that we normally have within these with these motions. Okay, and Ms. Akan's motion, is there any comment on this? I realize you haven't had a week to look at these. We've all kind of received them. Given Madame Lapointe's concern, I'm going to hold this until 12 o'clock, and then at 12 o'clock, when we finish with this panel of witnesses that have been already waiting a long time, I will ask if everybody's in agreement, and we will adopt it at that time. Okay?
I appreciate. Thank you.
Right?
Merci.
Sure, we keep everybody happy here. All right. So we have with us today friends that have been here before from the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association, Mr. Kingston, President and Chief Executive Officer, and from the National Cattle Feeders Association, Kathy Jo Noble, Vice President. Welcome to you both. Apologies for the late tardiness, but you know, it's that time of the year. So you know the rules are for interpretation, so I'm going to go right into Mr. Kingston. I invite you to speak to us for up to 5 minutes, please.
Thank you,
And
Madam
do
Chair.
you have your earpieces?
Ready to go.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Madam Chair, committee members, thank you for the invitation to be here today as part of your study of the CUSMA review. The Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association, CVMA, is the association that represents Canada's leading manufacturers of light and heavy-duty motor vehicles. Our membership includes Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis. CVMA members have been operating here in Canada for over 100 years, and in fact, we just celebrated our 100th year anniversary in 2026. They are responsible for most of the auto production in this country, having built over 100 million vehicles since 1945. And today, they're the largest employers, investors, and innovators in the auto manufacturing sector. Now, with over 90% of Canadian production destined for the U.S., U.S. market access and North American integration are the foundation of the auto industry. Diversification is not an option for automotive, as markets in Europe and Asia are better served by assembly plants in those regions. Canada's market alone is too small to justify large-scale manufacturing. Simply put, there is no Canadian auto industry without the U.S. the future of the industry, and the hundreds of thousands of jobs that it supports requires securing our trade relationship. U.S. Section 232 tariffs on the automotive industry and Canada's retaliatory measures are doing enormous damage to the integrated North American auto supply chain. The total tariff bill is projected to reach U.S. $188 billion on auto manufacturers by the end of next year. As it stands today, it is more cost-effective to build a vehicle in Japan or Germany and export it to the U.S. than to build a vehicle in North America for the U.S. market. Given our integration with the United States, the situation facing Canada is particularly acute. Tariffs levied on Canadian vehicles reached $5 billion in 2025. This is eroding the competitiveness of our domestic production and making it an increasingly difficult environment for automotive investment. So as we prepare for the CUSMA review, we're recommending the following actions which we think will position Canada for success. Number one is to eliminate the Canada-China Strategic Partnership. This agreement, negotiated with China, allows 49,000 EVs into Canada. That's 30% of the number of EVs sold last year. That is not an insignificant amount, and that undermines our sector right now, and it puts the North American auto supply chain at risk. China does not adhere to the rules-based trade and investment principles that have been really fundamental to the success of the auto industry and more broadly the Canadian economy. Importantly, there's no guardrails in this agreement to ensure a level playing field for manufacturers that have invested here or to protect Canadians from cyber risks. So in addition to having a surtax on Chinese EVs, we've been urging the federal government to proceed with the proposed ban on certain Chinese connected vehicle software that's aligned to the U.S. This will protect Canadian drivers from foreign actors manipulating these technologies to access sensitive or personal information. It will also position us for success in our discussions with the Americans. And number two, reduce regulatory complexity. In the face of trade disruptions and U.S. tariffs, we have to do everything possible right now to strengthen the conditions for automotive investment by focusing on what we can control. So this means getting rid of, reducing the regulatory burden facing companies by lowering the cost of investing in plants, machinery, and R&D here in Canada. A couple of examples for you. The federal EV sales mandate does remain in place to this day, 4 months after it was announced that it would be repealed. So we've been recommending that it be immediately repealed because it puts costs on manufacturers. And while urgency is required to remove the EV mandate, the opposite holds true for the development of Canada's sovereign GHG regulations, also known as tailpipe regulations. The federal government is currently rushing forward with the development of Canada-unique regulations. We are totally integrated with the U.S. Taking a Canada-unique approach here can be extremely risky for our automotive industry. So we're asking the government to take time and do this properly. I will close on a note of optimism. I do believe there's a deal to be had. We have to get to the table. The Americans are focused on deficits. And if that is the lens that they're using, Canada is the only country in the world that is well positioned in that discussion. The Americans ran an average $2.7 billion auto trade surplus with Canada since the USMCA was put into force. We are the only country in the world the Americans run a surplus with. So there is a deal to be had here. We are not part of the problem. In fact, we are part of the solution for the Americans. So we have to get to the table. We can get a deal done, but this has to happen immediately. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kington. Ms. Noble, please, for up to 5 minutes.
Great, thank you. Thank you for inviting the National Cattle Feeders Association to appear before your committee today, and thank you for a number of agricultural witnesses which you have called before you because CUSMA is a priority for our sector. NCFA is the voice of cattle feeders, beef farmers who bring calves onto their feedlots, modify their diets from grass to a high-energy feed to propel weight gain, and create high-quality marbled beef products that we enjoy in Canada and around the world. Feedlots can vary in size, but they're still family operations, often involving multiple family members and generations. They are the fabric of rural Canada and the linchpin in the Canadian beef sector. Our industry is export dependent. Each year, Canada exports approximately 50% of our live cattle and beef. Of that, 75% goes to the U.S. and 5% goes to Mexico. The Canada-U.S. beef industries are a deeply integrated market, with a live animal crossing the border often more than once. They'll be born in the U.S., brought up to a Canadian feedlot to be fed, and then sent back down to the U.S. to be processed. And that integration also includes imports and veterinary drugs. The integration of the market has been greatly facilitated by CUSMA and the trade agreements that preceded it. We support market diversification for beef, but my members are operating with live animals. Animals that have limits in the length that they can be transported, and thus it amplifies that Canada-U.S. integrated market. Despite our frustrations with our relationship with the U.S. at the time, our most important trading partner is the U.S., and a highly functioning, unobstructed border is an absolute for the success of the Canadian beef industry. We acknowledge the work of the government on the CUSMA renewal, and the sector has also been doing its homework. We have been in close communication with our own government, and last week, the National Cattle Feeders signed a letter along with 160 other associations from Mexico, the U.S., and Canada to Minister LeBlanc and his U.S. and Mexico counterparts, calling for the renewal of CUSMA. In addition, last week, I spent the week in Washington with the Canadian Agri-Food Trade Alliance, meeting with U.S. decision makers, delivering our message, and also garnering insight on where their mindset is at. We delivered a message of economic benefit of CUSMA for the agriculture sector on both sides, but also the benefit for consumers and food affordability on both sides, as well as food security and availability throughout the year. I will close my comments by noting that securing a positive CUSMA renewal is complicated when parallel deals with other regions are being made, in particular Mercosur, a deal that's going to send a wrong message to the U.S. and the CUSMA process, because when prices become depressed in Canada, it impacts the entire North American market. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, we'll open the floor for questions. Mr. Mantle for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to our witnesses for appearing and providing your valuable testimony to the committee. Mr. Kingston, my questions will be primarily directed to you. Thank you for your opening statement. If I understand your view, it's that without access to the U.S. market, there is no auto industry in Canada. Is that correct?
That's correct. 90% of what is built here is destined for the U.S. market. There is no replacement for that market.
Thank you. I also gather from your opening statements, you made a comment that diversity is not an option. We have heard repeatedly from the government that Canadian auto manufacturers will build vehicles in Canada and export them to other markets around the world, other markets than the United States. Is that a reasonable possibility?
No, there is no business case to build cars in Canada and export them to markets around the world. The U.S. is the most important market. It is the closest market. It's the only market that makes sense for large-scale auto manufacturing. And just to give you a really tangible example from one manufacturer that tried to diversify a product that they were building in Canada, at maximum was able to get about 2 weeks of production to markets around the world. The rest was dedicated to the United States, and that was with great effort. So there is no world in which we diversify and export vehicles from Canada to the world.
So no access, no industry.
That's correct.
Okay. I want to ask you about the tailpipe emissions standard that the government has revised recently. So previously, the government had mandated sales of EVs, zero-emission vehicles. Now there's no mandate, but the emission standards have been tightened. Am I understanding the state of play correctly?
So the mandate is still technically in force. The intention is to do away with it and then tighten the stringencies of the tailpipe standards. That has not happened yet. We are still waiting for the government to table their proposed regulation.
Okay, so you're a bit of purgatory right now.
That's correct.
Okay. If the government proceeds, my understanding is from comments that the Prime Minister made, he said that the government will be, quote, tightening by twofold the emissions standard. Is that roughly your understanding of that new approach?
Yeah, the target that was announced by the Prime Minister was to get to 75% EV sales by 2035. Depending on how you translate to the tailpipe standards, that could be a doubling or more in terms of stringency.
And I believe 90% by 2040 was the second target. So what are the options for manufacturers to meet the new standards? I mean, there's no mandate to sell EVs, but we have a new standard. So what's a manufacturer to do?
So a manufacturer and they continue to innovate and find ways to lightweight vehicles, make gas engines more efficient, but there is a limit. There is an engineering and a technical limit to what can be done. Once you've reached the maximum of those efficiencies, then you're left with really only two options, which is exactly what happened under the EV mandate. You either have to start restricting the sale of gas-powered vehicles here in Canada, or you have to buy compliance credits from manufacturers who have a surplus. So those are the two options, both very damaging economically and to the companies that build here and employ Canadians.
So it seems to me that the emission standard is going to result in the same issue that existed with the sales mandate. Is that accurate?
That is a very real risk if this is not done correctly.
So is the emission standard then not simply a backdoor sales mandate?
If they design it without real input from auto manufacturers, if they do not look at the data on what's achievable and make this stringent to levels that no manufacturer can achieve, then yes, the tailpipe regulations will simply be an EV mandate by another name.
Right. I mean, that was my impression. I mean, if you tighten the emission standard so much, the only vehicles that will qualify at that point functionally are going to be your plug-in or your battery electric zero-emission vehicles.
That's correct.
I'm trying to understand what they really did here, but it seems like maybe it's just the same thing, you know, a new wolf in different clothing.
Yes, that is a very possible outcome, and we've been urging the government to work with industry to not repeat the mistakes of the past. We can provide technical data on what is achievable and what is feasible, but that data during the last round when EVAS was developed was frankly ignored, and hence we ended up with a regulation that was clearly unachievable from the day that the ink dried. I would like to avoid that again. That was damaging and it was costly, and I'm concerned that we're going down the same path.
Thank you for that. One last question. There was a recent review by RBC on the amount of public dollars that have been pumped into EVs supply chain, and according to the parliamentary budget officer, it was $46 billion pledged between 2020 and 2024, and then RBC says $53 billion in government funding. So I'm trying to understand. The government says this will be a return on investment, but my math says that's less than $1 of private investment for every dollar of government investment. Am I understanding the state of play?
Well, this is why we need markets to be at the center and the consumer to be at the center of government policy here. You can encourage manufacturers to invest in this technology, but we have to make sure there's a market for it. And unfortunately, we went down a road where the mandated technologies were being forced on Canadian consumers. The demand wasn't there, and this is the result. I mean, every manufacturer has written off tens of billions of dollars in investment into electrification because the market simply wasn't where people thought it would be.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. On to Mr. French. Mr. Yasser, please.
Thank you. I was expecting you were going first, but here I am. Mr. Kingston, I'm going to ask you the question. I mean, I totally understand the warning that you're heeding. You've been quite consistent in that in all your public engagement. You, I think, also understand the effort that the Canadian government is putting to ensure that CUSMA remains in place because it is advantageous to all three parties, and there's a stated goal by the government in ensuring that we sign on to a deal that is in the best interest of Canada. What is your advice? What are you recommending to the Canadian government as we engage in this review with the view of July 1st, which is not a cliff? You know, we've still got room beyond July 1st, but really want to understand your perspective in terms of the approach the Canadian government is taking, things that you are comfortable with and things that you want us to go further in a particular direction.
First and foremost, we have to get to the table. The U.S. desire, of course, is to negotiate bilaterally, and there's only so much control we have over that. But the sooner we open up those bilateral discussions, the better positioned we will be. Secondly, we need to make sure that as part of these discussions, the removal of 232s is front and center. Any agreement that doesn't result in tariff relief for these key sectors will not be very valuable. It provides some certainty for investment, but if we don't get that, the tariff costs removed, we'll be in a very difficult situation. And then thirdly, and I know that Minister LeBlanc tabled this last week, but making sure that this agreement is renewed for a longer period of time. We can't end up in a scenario where we're going through this every year for the next 10 years. That will be very damaging to the investment climate. So a long-term renewal, 16 years, if we can negotiate that, would be very, very welcome.
Yeah, so I don't think there's any light between what you are suggesting and what Minister LeBlanc and the Canadian government is attempting to do is precisely that, is to engage in a meaningful conversation. Of course, the 232 tariffs are of integral importance in terms of the impact on Canadian industry, especially on those targeted sectors like autos, and seeking that predictability and certainty that we need. So I appreciate your thoughts on that. Ms. Noble, I want to sort of hear from your sector's perspective, thoughts as to what your advice is to the Canadian government as we are engaging in the process towards a review of CUSMA and hopefully a renewal on a longer term.
Yeah, I echo what Brian said in that in the lifespan of a cattle, you need some predictability about where that end market is and what that looks like. So something that is not just year by year renewal is going to be important. So far, food and specifically beef has not been impacted by the tariffs that are in place. I think for 2 days it was. And that has been beneficial both for us but also for consumers, because that integrated market also provides the lowest cost product to the consumer. So our message is fairly simple. We would like CUSMA renewed in a timely manner in its current state. There's always going to be regulatory challenges that we can work through as we proceed forward to get more regulatory alignment at the border and so forth. But really for us, it's bringing it forward in its current state.
So when it comes to your sector, the cattle sector, there is an advantage within CUSMA and that has been maintained?
Yes, absolutely. I think that integration and the economic benefit has been because of CUSMA.
Excellent. And obviously the aim is to maintain that integration and that advantage. And similarly within the auto sector, it's worked so well in terms of the integrated supply chain. I always try to remind people that there's not an American car, it's a North American car, and maybe that's the cause of concern for the president. But we need to maintain that because it keeps the North American auto manufacturing at a competitive level. In absence of a renewal, and I don't like to think that way, what is the impact on, I'll go to you, Mr. Kingston, what is the impact you see on the North American auto manufacturing, as it relates to the global competition?
Well, we're already seeing the impacts of U.S. tariffs on the sector. So North American production last year declined by 2%. Production in China, up 10%. So this is protectionism in action. When you put costs on your manufacturers, you weaken the business case to build in North America. In the event we get to a place where there is no tariff relief for Canada or Mexico, permanently tariff North American environment, we just simply have a smaller industry, perhaps significantly smaller, because we built 1.3 million vehicles last year. 1.1 million of those went to the United States. You can't replace that market. So the production levels inevitably will come down dramatically, and with it, jobs and investment. I don't want to contemplate that because I do think there's a deal to be had, but that's where this takes us.
I totally agree with you. I don't want to contemplate it either because I do believe that there's deal to be had, and I see the chair.
Yes, thank you very much. The bells are ringing. It's a 30-minute bell. Are we okay to continue up until the time to vote? And then if we can vote here, we can keep going on with our meeting. Is everybody okay with that? And Madame Lapointe, are you okay with the two motions as amended for Mr. Chambers, right?
Merci
Okay
beaucoup.
with both of them. Thank you very much from a committee's perspective. That's taken care of. Mr. Gabriel St. Marie, for 6 minutes, please.
Oui, merci, Madame la Présidente. Donc,
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and hello to our colleagues. And I'm sorry I can't be there in person today. I have family obligations. And thank you to our two witnesses for being here. Again, very interesting content. My first question is for Mr. Kingston. It's nice to see you again. We chatted a few weeks ago at the committee, at the industry committee. Mr. Kingston, in your opening statement, you said that Canada buys more American vehicles than Americans buy vehicles manufactured in Canada. Is that correct?
Export market for U.S. manufactured vehicles by far. So we are the biggest market for the U.S. We do send more vehicles to the U.S. than we import from the U.S., but when you include automotive parts, that's where the U.S. runs a significant automotive trade surplus.
OK, donc ça, c'est un bon argument en faveur de rétablir.
So you want to reestablish free trade. Now, with the free trade agreement and CUSMA, we've developed a very integrated automotive chain. So between all three countries, Mexico, the U.S., and Canada. Now, the tariffs and the sanctions, if you will, imposed by the Trump government have weakened our automotive ecosystem. Is that correct?
Weekend, and you can see it in virtually every data point. The total tariff costs incurred by manufacturers, the fact that production is declining. U.S. exports of vehicles to Canada declined by 26%, one of the biggest drops we've seen in years, and that's because, of course, Canada's retaliated on U.S. vehicles. So you're seeing major disruptions to the supply chain, and that's why I made that point at the outset that in many instances, companies are better off building in Japan or Europe and exporting to the U.S. than building in North America right now.
C'est inacceptable, cette façon de faire.
Well, that's quite unacceptable, actually. Now, your association reminds us how important it is to have a free trade agreement between all three countries, Mexico, the U.S., and Canada. However, the Trump administration, and this might be a negotiating strategy, has said that it might be willing to only sign bilateral agreements. But please tell us why a trilateral agreement between all three countries is more important.
Trilateral agreement is critical because we don't build cars independently in North America. You know, Mr. Nakvi said it well. There is no such thing as a Canadian car. There's no such thing as a Mexican car or an American car. It's a North American car. And that's because we see the parts and components moving across the border numerous times before the vehicle reaches final assembly. So for any agreement, given the way the supply chain is designed, it's important that we have common rules of origin so that we can be more efficient as a North American bloc. If we go down the road of separate bilaterals, of course, anything is possible, but that just means higher costs for manufacturers, which ultimately translates to higher vehicle costs for consumers. That's not good for anybody.
Merci. Bon, ici.
Thank you. Now, all parties here and the government are calling on free trade to be reestablished as it was under the Free Trade Agreement and CUSMA with both the U.S. and Mexico. Now, the American Vehicle Builders Association is also calling for a good free trade agreement, which is upheld. Is that the case?
That's correct. And our counterpart association was actually just in Ottawa last week, and they've been making the case to the administration that we need USMCA renewed and tariff relief, because they see the benefit that Canada and Mexico provide to the U.S. manufacturing base. So there's pretty much perfect alignment amongst the industry around U.S. tariffs and the importance of USMCA.
Oui. Puis vous nous confirmez que votre
Can
association.
you confirm that your association, or rather your sister association in the U.S., is putting pressure on the U.S. administration for a free trade agreement and to remove the tariffs? What are they telling you? Are they optimistic that the Trump administration will, this summer, be open to a new agreement and remove the tariffs or not? And does the American Vehicle Manufacturers Association, will it sue the Trump administration for non-respect of the agreement because of all the tariffs?
There definitely is a sense of optimism, probably more with respect to the Canada-U.S. relationship than U.S.-Mexico. And that's really for the reason I pointed out at the outset. If you accept the U.S. administration's worldview that trade deficits are bad and everything must be done to avoid trade deficits, Canada then is part of the solution, not the problem, because we are the only jurisdiction that they have an automotive trade surplus with. So that is encouraging. With respect to a legal challenge, it's highly unlikely with Section 232 tariffs. Those are tariffs that are put in place after an investigation has taken place to indicate that this sector is of national importance to the U.S. So I think it's unlikely that you'll see legal challenges on 232s, but I would defer to a lawyer who would have better advice on that.
Thank you very much. On to Mr. Gerlo for 5 minutes, please.
Bonjour, Madame la Présidente. C'est un plaisir de vous voir aujourd'hui.
Hello, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to see you here this morning. Now, obviously for business, predictability is important, and a colleague of mine mentions this often. You said that 16 years is a long time for the CUSMA, which is good. What is the negative side to reviewing it every year?
Where it's being reviewed every year, what you ultimately end up with is a situation whereby your negotiating partner, in this case it would be the Americans, could have a new list of demands on an annual basis that they would like to see Canada address. Now, Canada could do the same, but there's a power balance issue here that we have. So if we have to go through that every single year, it makes it really difficult for any business that's deploying, in the instance of autos, we're talking about tens of billions of dollars in capital. If you don't have certainty around what the rules are next year, very hard to make those investment decisions.
Madame Noble?
Yeah, it comes down to predictability. And being able to purchase cattle for that feedlot and know that you have a market at the end, and not constantly questioning your investment in your business because you're not sure what will be at the other end in regard to a market. And these are large feedlots in Alberta, where most of the feedlots exist, 70%. We're speaking about 40,000 animals on one feedlot. So it's a very significant investment they're making, a multi-million-dollar investment, and they can't do it if they don't have the predictability of a market at the end.
Madame Noble, dans votre introduction, vous avez parlé de la négociation de...
Ms. Noble, in your opening statements, you talked about other trade agreements like Mercosur, and dealing with them, would that affect our relationship with the U.S.? Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. I think that certainly when we speak to our U.S. counterparts, we understand that they are watching what we're doing in markets, whether that be China or Mercosur. And Mercosur does not have the same standards in regard to labor animal care, phytosanitary regulations. And so when you don't have the same standards, you can produce beef cheaper and you're going to bring it in a low quality, low cost beef. And that displaces the Canadian market. But because we're so integrated, that displaces the U.S. market as well. If you're depressing beef and cattle prices in Canada, then we're going to sell it cheaper into the U.S. market, and then they're not getting the same benefit as well. And also when it comes to disease, Mexico, U.S., Canada are very integrated. We're seeing that now with the current challenges with screwworm. And so when you're bringing in product from a country that doesn't have the same standards for disease or reporting standards, that's going to be watched by the U.S. and is just a black mark that's not going to help the CUSMA negotiations.
Si vous avez un message à faire au gouvernement, 3 priorités.
If you had 3 priorities for the government, things we could easily implement under the next agreement, what would those be?
Well, as I say, our top priority is just to renew it and get predictability in place again and move forward. There are regulatory challenges in misalignments at the border or in transportation of the animals, but those are not for us a reason to open up CUSMA, to delay CUSMA. We want to see it renewed as quickly as possible for as long as possible, and we're continuing to work through initiatives such as the Regulatory Cooperation Council to address those challenges.
Merci. Une dernière question, M. Kingston. Dans vos remarques, vous avez parlé de l'entente des 49 000.
Final question, Mr. Kingston. You mentioned the 49,000 Chinese vehicles entering Canada. For you, is that the tip of the iceberg? Do you think that this fact can affect our national security, and do you believe the government should cancel that agreement?
I do believe the government should cancel the agreement. It is a threat to national security. There's no world in which this is contained at 49,000 vehicles. It's set to grow by 6.5% every year. But just look at the way China engages in trade relations with other countries. We have opened the door. They will now leverage that at every opportunity to gain more access. So the agreement on canola, for example, is time limited. What do you think they're going to ask for when Canada says we'd like to extend that? They're going to want more access to our automotive market. Just look at what's happened in Europe. Europe was naive, I would say, about what China meant to their automotive market. They opened the door, and the European automotive industry is under pressure like we've never seen before, losing tens of thousands of jobs as Chinese manufacturers take more and more market share. So this is extremely dangerous and obviously has security risks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kingston. On to Mr. Hassey, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you also to our 2 witnesses, Mr. Kingston and Ms. Noble. Your testimony has been very, very helpful. Now, if I could start off with Mr. Kingston, you often talk about how integrated the North American auto industry is. Would it be fair to say that that integration has enhanced the competitiveness of North American manufactured cars vis-a-vis Europe and China?
For sure. The fact that manufacturers can build in Canada, the U.S., or Mexico, use parts and components from those other markets, and then sell into the largest auto trade bloc in the world has made them far more competitive. And so if you pull that apart, then you'll see the predictable results, which is less production.
Absolutely. Would you mind spending a minute on the competitive advantage that Canada has and how it makes the North American industry more competitive?
Well, our main advantage has been access to the U.S. market. And so when you look at why other manufacturers came to Canada, it was because they could build here, service Canada, which is a 2 million vehicle market a year, but then send most of their production to the U.S., which purchase about 60 million.
No, but I meant between the 3 jurisdictions in North America.
Yeah. So, I mean, but that is number one. It's U.S. access is the main reason that we're competitive. We do have advantages in other areas, though. I mean, we talk about the Canadian labor force being highly educated, highly skilled, highly punctual. There are many benefits to having a Canadian-based manufacturing facility. Compare that to Mexico. They have a labor cost advantage, but it's not the same workforce quality that you would have here in Canada. The one other area of advantage, which hasn't really we haven't realized it, but I do believe there's a potential for it if EV adoption finally increases. But we do happen to have all of the critical minerals necessary for batteries. And right now the world is totally dependent on China. That can't continue. So as companies and countries try and reduce China dependence, Canada is where a lot of that activity should be taking place.
Thank you. Now, if we could go to the next issue, which is 232 tariffs. I have heard from some people say, well, first of all, why don't you tell us how much has been collected in tariffs from the big three?
I have the total amount for the 5 in Canada, so it's over 5 billion Canadian through 2025. It's not broken down by company just because that's based off U.S. CBP data.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you don't have data for the states as well?
For the U.S.,
How much it is
so they've collected about 34 billion U.S. on all manufacturers, and that's just based off quarterly reports from the companies themselves.
So would it be fair to say, because I have heard some experts say this, that prior to 232, North America was the second most competitive area to manufacture cars after, I presume, China. And now it's out of the three, which is China, Europe, and North America, it's the least competitive out of the three because of these tariffs?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, the cost of manufacturing in North America has gone up significantly. I talk a lot about the 232s on auto, but the Americans have also put tariffs on aluminum and steel. And aluminum happens to be, in particular, a very key input into the automotive supply chain. So North America is now significantly less competitive.
Okay. So you provided some numbers. Chinese production is up 10%. North America is down 2%. What is Europe down in the last year?
I don't have that data with me. I can get it for you, but off the top of my head, I'm not sure.
So in terms of data, could you tell us how much more expensive these tariffs have made the average car produced in North America?
Yeah, so the estimates vary from about 5,000 US to a maximum 12,000 US for a vehicle. So significant increase in prices.
Understood. So as you know, there's a lot of discussion about rules of origin and changing those. These are reports that we see in different publications. What would you say about that? First of all, do you think, insofar as the auto sector is concerned, that these rules of origins changes would be best discussed between the three North American partners?
Absolutely. The current rules of origin are trilateral, so any changes need to be trilateral as well. But I do caution against any changes to the rules of origin. This is a new agreement. CUSMA is only 6 years old. And it has some of the most advanced rules of origin that we've ever negotiated. Auto manufacturers took years to change their supply chain to come into compliance with the 75% North American content rule. To do this now and to require even more North American content or U.S.-specific content, that's just more cost and ultimately means that we're less competitive as a jurisdiction. So I caution against it, but realize we may have no choice.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kingston. Mr. St. Marie for 2.5 minutes, please.
Oui. Merci, Madame la Présidente. Donc, pour Monsieur Kingston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Kingston, you've reminded us all the extent to which aluminum goes into the manufacturing of e-vehicles. Currently, Quebec's aluminum exports are going to Europe rather than to the U.S. because of the tariffs. And unless I'm mistaken, most aluminum imports into the U.S. come from the Middle East, and several tankers are being held up in the Hormuz Strait, which could lead to a shortfall of aluminum in the States. What have you heard about that from the U.S.? Any chance there will be a shortage of aluminum components for vehicles? And if so, and so would that shortage be worsened if the Strait of Hormuz does not open anytime soon?
There already have been shortages, and there's risk of further shortages. There was also a fire at an aluminum facility in the United States, which did have an impact on the automotive supply chain. So I think there is a recognition of the challenges here. And frankly, the Americans can't build more smelting capacity. The reason we have such a competitive sector here in Canada is because in Quebec you have hydroelectricity, which has created this phenomenal aluminum production ecosystem. So there's no world in which the Americans build capacity. Most of their electricity is going to data centers right now, not aluminum smelters. So they need Canada, and I think there's a recognition of that.
OK, merci. Vous avez aussi parlé de l'avantage stratégique
You also
qu'on a.
talked about Canada's strategic advantage with regard to rare and strategic and rather critical minerals. And this is an advantage in the North American auto sector. Is that an advantage only for e-vehicles or also conventional vehicles made in North America?
For electric vehicles, simply because the critical minerals are mostly being used in the development of next generation EV batteries, and we do happen to have every single mineral that goes into the battery chemistries that are being used right now, and the majority of that currently is being supplied one way or another by China, if not produced in China, processed in China. So this strikes me as a significant opportunity for Canada if we can rapidly improve mining and build some processing capacity.
Okay, thank you very much. We have 9 minutes until we vote. We have two speakers, Mr. Chambers and Ms. Aken. Are they remaining for this round?
I'll keep under time here for
Okay.
you. So you want to split it between the two of us?
Yes. So
Okay.
could you do 3 minutes to you and 3 minutes to Ms. Aken, and then we will suspend for the vote.
Sure, thank you. Ms. Noble, so very quickly, if I might, I noticed that the last time CFIA completed inspections for Argentina and Brazil was Argentina 2013 and Brazil 2017. In your estimation, if there is a deal with Mercosur, would you have an expectation that those inspections would be updated?
We would hope so. One of our main concerns is the reporting, disease reporting, and delay in disease reporting that comes out of some of the Mercosur countries, as well as the phytosanitary standards that are being met or not met. So yes.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kingston, I noted in your opening statement, you suggested that the U.S. has a trade surplus in automobiles with Canada. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And you also mentioned, CUSMA is a new agreement, but from the U.S.'s perspective, if they have a trade surplus with automobiles, is there not an argument to be made that their arrangement is working for them?
Absolutely. Since this was implemented, they've run an average $2.7 billion surplus with Canada, the only country in the world that the Americans run an auto surplus with. So this agreement is working for Canada and for America.
And we're told that the president personally focuses on the trade surplus and deficits, almost to the exclusion of any other fact.
That's correct.
So why? It seems bizarre to me that automobiles as an irritant or a trade issue have not been talked about with the Americans at any formal table. Does that concern you as an industry?
Absolutely. We are part of the solution to what the U.S. is trying to achieve through these tariffs and renewal of USMCA. We are not the problem. So this should be discussed, and there is a clear agreement to be negotiated.
And then perhaps just finally, I was sobering testimony about, the Trojan horse of China. I'll use that word, Trojan horse, of the long-term implications, but also there is no real business case to send vehicles from Canada efficiently throughout the rest of the world. Does that kind of have that right for you?
There's no business case whatsoever, and you just look at some of the trade barriers that manufacturers in North America face into Japan, Europe, Korea, China. We do not have free access to those markets for automotive. Why would we give it up for nothing here in Canada?
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Aken, for 3 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Kingston, thanks for joining us today. So the Alliance for Automotive Innovation is the leading trade association representing vehicle manufacturers in the United States, including Ford, General Motors, and Stellantis, which three of those companies are also your clients too. So how closely is your organization coordinating with AII heading into the CUSMA review, and where do Canadian and American industries' interests converge?
I'm happy to say that we collaborate very closely. There are weekly calls between the North American Automotive Industry Associations on priorities with respect to the trade environment, and where we all see eye to eye is on the fact that the tariffs are costly and damaging, and that USMCA is fundamental to the success of the auto industry.
So pretty much you are saying that they are feeling the same issues that we are feeling, and do you see that their interest aligning with us completely?
Yes, I see very close alignment between what the American associations are asking for and what we are saying.
Thank you so much. So the government has been advancing a domestic automotive strategy alongside the CUSMA file, and you and I were at the announcement back in February. And same day, your official statement was welcoming the government's automotive strategy that was announced that day. So what elements of that strategy are most meaningful to your members in terms of long-term competitiveness?
First and foremost is repealing EVAS. The EV mandate had been a long-standing irritant, so the fact that the strategy confirmed that that would be repealed was very important. And then secondly, reintroducing consumer-facing supports for electrification. The previous EV incentive had been dropped almost overnight in 2024, and that resulted in a significant decline. If we want higher EV adoption, you have to incentivize it, and we're already seeing that in the data.
Thank you so much. And last question. At a CUSMA roundtable held in my riding, Ford raised their nickel processing investment in Indonesia, and where the Indonesian government conditioned the access to its resources on processing to remain in the country. Canada has world-class nickel reserves and an abundance of resources, including cobalt and lithium, but has not applied the same type of approach to the industrial policy lever. So do you think Canada could pursue a similar approach, and what would that unlock for automotive investments here at home?
I have to ask for a brief answer.
Sure.
I think first and foremost, we just have to approve mining projects. We have the ability to be a powerhouse in terms of global mineral production, but we need to approve projects, build the infrastructure to get them to market, and I think we'll be well positioned.
Thank you very much. Thank you for our witnesses for your patience with us today and your valuable information. I will suspend until after the vote, and so I'll suspend until the vote is finished. today to continue the study with Canada's trade with Japan. We have the Business Council of Canada, Trevor Kennedy, Vice President, Asia Pacific by video conference. Glad you were able to make it to the committee this time, Mr. Kennedy. And from the Canadian Canola Growers Association, Rick White, President and Chief Executive Officer. And from Pacific Manufacturing Association of Canada, Brendan Sweeney, President and Chief Executive Officer, also by video conference. Right? I need to remind witnesses that committee members may ask questions in either French or English. And if you need interpretation, please take a moment to familiarize yourself with the earpiece and select the listening channel in order to take full advantage of your allotted time. And I've suggested to the committee that we would go until 1:15, given the interruption of the votes. If that's all right with everybody, we will proceed. Mr. Kennedy, I give you the floor for up to 5 minutes, please.
Well, Madam Chair, committee members, thank you for the invitation to take part in your meeting on Canada's trade with Japan. The Business Council of Canada is composed of 175 chief executives and entrepreneurs
Mr. Kennedy,
of Canada's leading enterprises.
1 second. I needed to confirm that we have unanimous consent from the committee to start. We do. Thank you very much. My apologies, Mr. Kennedy. Please continue.
No problem. Thank you. While it would have been an honor to speak to the committee in person today, it's also fitting to participate from the Business Council of Canada's first regional office for the Asia-Pacific region based in Tokyo. Canada and Japan share a long and prosperous economic relationship with significant two-way trade volumes and with Japan serving as one of the largest investors in Canada. While the economic relationship has been strong for decades, in recent years, Canada and Japan have become strategic partners, and with this change, we have seen several new areas of opportunity emerge for the business community. Japan is a major market for Canadian wood and lumber, canola, fertilizers, minerals, pork, seafood, and other products. These continue to be lucrative for Canadian exporters, but there are new opportunities to grow as well. And following decades of stable energy demand, under the 2025 Strategic Energy Plan, the Japanese government revised demand forecast upward due to growing needs from data centers and due to reindustrialization. Japan is prioritizing diverse and stable suppliers, and Canada is well positioned to benefit. Canada has already demonstrated it can be a major exporter in the form of liquefied petroleum gas, LPG. AltaGas is now responsible for 25% of Japan's total LPG imports. Following the completion of LNG Canada last year, Canada started exporting gas to Japan, one of the largest buyers in the world. And Japan is also rapidly reintroducing nuclear power to its mix. The resumption of activity in this sector could provide Canada with opportunities for uranium exports, engineering, and the adoption of new technologies. Service providers are an important part of the relationship as well. There were over 688,000 arrivals from Canada last year, a significant flow of travelers enabled by the growing number of flight options provided by Air Canada and WestJet. And other leading service providers with a large presence in the market include Manulife and OpenText, and many large Canadian banks have a presence or are expanding in Tokyo. And while this meeting's focused on trade, it's important to acknowledge the significant role that investment plays in the relationship. Japan is a leading investor in Canada with a long history of creating well-paying jobs in manufacturing, energy and mining, and technology sectors. This should continue as corporate Japan prioritizes overseas investment and strengthening regional supply chains. At the same time, Japan has become a more attractive and lucrative destination for Canadian institutional investors. There's been a noticeable uptick of activity on the ground among pension funds and other investors. The clear priority for the Japanese government and the business community is economic security. In recent years, Japan has become vulnerable to supply chain shocks caused by natural disasters, pandemics, and geopolitics. Japan sees Canada as a potential solution to many of its problems. However, in repeated cases, while there was an interest, the risk and uncertainty presented by Canada has forced Japan to look to other global opportunities. For instance, following Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Japan asked Canada to help reduce its reliance on Russian oil and gas. And it's true that since this time, Canada completed the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion and LNG Canada. But these projects were already under construction, and no meaningful measures were taken at the time to expedite developments that would have led to additional exports. Moving to the present, disruptions caused by the conflict in the Middle East could have an even greater challenge for Japan. It's determined to solve this problem and so far focused efforts on working more closely with the United States, Brazil, Mexico, among others, and Canada should be part of the solution as well. Similarly, Japan hopes to develop a secure supply chain for critical minerals, with Canada being an ideal partner if we can move at the pace that's needed. Japan's working to diversify its defense partnerships and reduce its reliance on a handful of equipment providers. It's also increasing its defense spending and opening the sector to export and partnership. Japan could be a partner for Canada as it works to strengthen its defense industrial base, and Canada has solutions it could provide to enhance Japanese security, including in cybersecurity. It may seem unusual to discuss CUSMA in a session focused on trade with Japan. However, Japanese businesses with a presence in Canada are present in part because of its proximity and connectivity to the North American economy. As Japanese Ambassador Yamanuchi recently explained to Canadians, uncertainty around the future of our agreement is a growing concern for Japanese businesses. It's critical that Canada secures this framework and that it continues to provide Canada with competitive access to the United States and Mexico. And so while there's room for improvement, it's clear that our relationship has never been stronger. And this extends to the business community as well. After decades of collaboration, the Business Council of Canada and Keidanren, Japan's leading business association, formed a strategic partnership late last year. We look forward to building on this partnership later this month during the upcoming Team Canada trade mission. Thank you for this opportunity. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. White, for up to 5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation to appear before this committee. My name is Rick White, and I'm the President and CEO of the Canadian Canola Growers Association based in Winnipeg. CCJ is a national association for Canada's 40,000 canola farmers, representing them on issues, policies, and programs that impact their farm success. Developed in Canada, canola is a staple of Canadian agriculture and our commitment to science and innovation. Canola is a strong economic contributor to family farms and our rural communities. In 2025, canola continued to be the #1 source of crop revenue for farmers, earning $12.1 billion, accounting for 24% of the total crop receipts. Canadian canola exports were valued at $12.6 billion in 2025, with over 80% of the crop being exported as seed, oil, and meal. Annually, the canola sector contributes $43.7 billion to the Canadian economy through direct, indirect, and induced economic activity, and provides for 200,000 jobs in Canada. Japan is consistently a top 5 importer of canola seed, and a market that was valued at $1.3 billion in 2025, an increase from $720 million in 2024. While primarily a seed market, small volumes of canola oil also go to Japan. Canadian canola products trade tariff-free with Japan through the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTPP, representing 10% of canola export value in 2025. I've had the privilege of witnessing firsthand the tremendous value of the 50-year partnership with the Japanese canola processing industry that Canadian farmers, seed exporters, and our respective governments have created. Since 1976, Canada and Japan have come together twice annually for what we call Canada-Japan canola consultations and pre-consultations to share information on the canola crop, supply and demand, canola quality, sustainability, transportation, and other topics. Areas of concern can be tabled and discussed on both sides so issues can find resolution instead of creating tension. This dynamic of open communication is a special one and unique among canola trading partners, making it our longest running and ongoing bilateral canola trading relationship. To underscore just how important the Japan market is to our farmers, I also serve as the Canadian co-chair to the Japan-Canada Chambers Council, the JCCC, a business forum that strengthens trade and economic ties between Canada and Japan. In this role, I help to advance discussions on trade, supply chains, and food security while representing the interests of Canadian agriculture. Our farmers' ability to continue to increase yield over this long history has made it possible to expand our markets for the crop while continuing to supply Japan with their needs. In this current market dynamic, where trading relationships and free trade agreements can be swiftly put in jeopardy, it's very apparent to me that Canadian farmers see the value in the relationship that's been built and the importance of consistent, reliable trading partners. The Japan market is a relatively stable and consistent market for Canadian canola, and one that farmers do not take for granted. Canadian canola has experienced unprecedented trade disruptions in the past 2 years, and the importance of a strong trade agreement through CPTPP and an annual dialogue with Japan has helped to shape the strong trading relationship that we see with them today. I'd like to thank this committee for taking the time to discuss and hear about this important trading relationship, and we look forward to a prosperous trading future for canola between Japan and Canada. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. White. On to Mr. Sweeney, please, for 5 minutes.
Great. Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to contribute to this important meeting on Canada-Japan trade. My name is Brendan Sweeney, and I'm the President and CEO of the Pacific Manufacturing Association of Canada, or PMAC. PMAC's members include Honda and Toyota, two Japan-based companies that have assembled vehicles in Canada for 4 decades. Honda and Toyota have made significant investments in Canada over those 4 decades, and as a result, make significant contributions to Canada's economy and its manufacturing sector. In 2025, Honda and Toyota assembled 77% of all vehicles made in Canada across 5 manufacturing facilities. They employed 60% of all active vehicle assembly plant workers. Neither company has ever laid off assembly plant employees in more than 4 decades. PMAC members operate alongside a Canadian network of more than 40 Tier 1 automotive parts manufacturers owned by Japan-based companies. These suppliers employ more than 20,000 people in Canada, or about 30% of Canada's active automotive parts manufacturing workforce. A large majority of the vehicles made by PMAC members are exported to the United States. That number ranges from 75 to 85%, depending on the vehicle model. Virtually all of the remainder are sold in Canada. At the moment, there are no realistically viable export markets outside the United States for the vehicles made at PMAC members' Canadian assembly plants. When it comes to the matter of exporting vehicles made in Canada by PMAC members, eliminating Section 232 tariffs, the renewal of CUSMA with reasonable regional value content requirements is and should be the federal government's first priority. The vehicles that PMAC members make in Canada are composed primarily of parts and components manufactured in Canada and in the United States, and to a lesser degree, Mexico. These vehicles are CUSMA compliant, which means that 75% of their content originates in North America. The vehicles manufactured by PMAC members in Canada also include certain components sourced from Japan. These are primarily electrical and electronic components that are not manufactured in North America. The ability to source those components from Japan reliably and efficiently is facilitated by the CPTPP. The total value of those components sourced from Japan, again, these are components that are not readily available in North America, is considerably less when compared to the total value of components sourced from Canada or United States. But they're important. We can't get these parts in North America at the moment. Free trade agreements such as CUSMA and the CPTPP support the competitiveness of PMAC members in Canada. This has led to a situation where PMAC members assemble nearly 3 times as many vehicles in Canada as they sell in Canada. That is a substantial 3-to-1 production to sales ratio that has not been matched at any other time, even during the industry peak in the late 1990s. Free trade with Japan, free trade with the United States, free trade with Mexico, these are all vital to the competitiveness of PMAC members in Canada. Maintaining free trade and good relationships with Japan is not complicated. It's status quo. If we want to improve those relations and maintain or even improve the competitiveness of the automotive industry in Canada, we should, focus on maintaining them, but also eliminating Sections 232 tariffs, renewing CUSMA for the long term, and better aligning Canada's environmental policy with its manufacturing strategy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to reduce it down to 5 minutes so we can try and get everybody, or at least some members, a chance. Mr. Davidson, please, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Mr. McSweeney. I'm going to try and get in as many questions as I can. And the Liberal government announced the deal allowing 49,000 Chinese EVs into Canada, while domestic manufacturers left out. They were left out of key consumer incentive programs. I'm wondering when and how, to your knowledge, did Honda Canada learn of this, let's say, arrangement in the auto strategy?
So I joined PMAC in late March of this year. That had been announced 2 months prior. So I'm not quite sure on the exact details of when Honda learned about that. I do think it probably could have been communicated better, as far as I understand.
Could have been communicated better. Yeah, that's what I was wondering, and that's what I've heard. That's why I'm trying to nail down whether they learnt about this, unfortunately, in the news and weren't given a heads up from this government, or they learned about it in some other fashion. This deal, it represents more than half of the EV market. What will the impact be on Canada's supply chains?
It's a bit early to say, and we don't have the exact details on whether this is going to be 49,000 EVs from one company, or this is going to be spread out between a number of different companies. Are these going to be EVs coming from China-based companies like BYD or Volvo Cars?
But we do know the incentives are going to be on 49,000 Chinese EVs. Why I say that, I'm proud to have Honda in my riding. It's their 40th anniversary this year. And, plants like Honda in Alliston, they produce world-class hybrid vehicles that employs thousands of Canadians. Yet this Liberal auto strategy explicitly excludes hybrids from the consumer purchase incentives. So why is this government actively undermining our Canadian auto workers and vehicles that are built here in Canada? Why would they be doing that?
I think that if there was a way to have the hybrids that are being manufactured, the majority of vehicles that PMAC members manufacture today in Canada are hybrid electric, with about a 25 to 30% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions. If there was a way for that to factor in to the environmental policy, that would do well to align it with the industrial strategy.
And sorry, sorry, I'm on limited time. As I understand it, Honda's had over 80 meetings with this current Liberal government, has gotten nowhere, waiting for the GHG tailpipe emissions. These are all self-inflicted. The EV strategy was self-inflicted by this Liberal government. We're still dealing with these problems. They haven't repealed the EV mandates. And so this has created uncertainty in the marketplace. I'm just looking for you to expand on that. We know that Quebec and BC have different emissions now than the rest of Canada. This government was elected on a promise to move at speeds Canadians have never seen before. That's how they were elected. This Prime Minister promised to deal with CUSMA a year ago, and the classic word now around Ottawa is still waiting. So I wonder if you could comment on that.
We would certainly appreciate some more clarity on where we're going to go with Section 232, with CUSMA, with GHG emissions in the very near future. I think we expect to get some of it sooner than later, because that would really help our members who continue to manufacture vehicles and operate assembly plants at or near full capacity today and have not laid anyone off.
You have 10 seconds remaining.
Okay, finally, how important is it for this government to, in a timely fashion, secure a CUSMA deal?
Very important.
Okay, Madame Lapointe, please, for 5 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente. Je vais avoir une question.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a question for Mr. Kennedy. Let me just find what I'm looking for here. Earlier, you said that you talked about liquefied petroleum gas. With what happened in Russia and Ukraine, that LPG shipments have increased. Can you talk more to that?
Yes, thank you for the question. It's honestly one of the greatest success stories that Canada has in this part of the world, and overall for exports. You know, leading Canadian company AltaGas has really, I think, successfully expanded into the region. I mentioned the exports to Japan, but also a market leader in Korea as well, and exploring other markets. I had the pleasure of attending an event just last month. A new ship was launched here in Japan that will be used to ship Canadian LPG from the west coast of Canada to markets in Asia. So we talk a lot about LNG and oil and other energy opportunities, but the LPG story is a fantastic opportunity. And we've heard markets like India and others express an interest in Canadian LPG. So it's certainly something worth looking into, and Canadians really should celebrate the success we've had in this part of the energy sector.
Pour continuer, vous avez parlé
To follow in that vein, you talked about tourism. 580,000 Canadians visited Japan. Fewer Japanese are coming here. Why not? Why do you believe more Canadians are visiting Japan?
That's a great question, and with my almost 20 years in the market, it's remarkable to see how many Canadians are traveling to this part of the world. I think it really underscores the appreciation that Canadians have, and I think particularly younger Canadians really have for the Japanese market. By my count, there are something like 10 daily flights now between Canada and Japan, which is remarkable. A decade ago, there may have been 2 or 3. So it's a great success story. There is a challenge right now for Japanese consumers. The yen is weaker than it has been historically. The Canadian dollar is at something, 1 Canadian dollar is equal to about 115 yen. It used to be the opposite of that, 20 years ago. It's difficult to say what the currency will look like over time. Wages are increasing here for the first time after many decades. Whether that leads to Japanese consumers being able to travel around the world, I'm not sure, but I know there's certainly a great appreciation for Canada and a real interest. So I do hope to see many more Japanese people visit Canada and reciprocate on this incredible people-to-people exchange we've seen with tourism.
Une autre question sur le tourisme.
I have another question about tourism. With regard to the GDP, how much does Canadian tourism in Japan represent for the Japanese GDP?
So even though 688,000 is a really big number by most standards, Japan is now welcoming about 40 million tourists per year. So we're not even in the top 10 to my knowledge. But we are one of the large draws. North American tourism has become very important for Japan, and I would need to verify this data point. But I believe that the tourism industry here now is more valuable than the value of auto exports to the world as just a percentage of GDP. So not to say one is more valuable than the other, but just to illustrate the size of the tourism sector here. But yeah, we are definitely an important market, and Air Canada operates a lot of its regional operations from here, and I think based on a lot of the success they've had, from this market.
Si, j'aurais une question pour Monsieur White. On entend
Thank you.
souvent.
I have a question for Mr. White. There's a lot of talk of phytosanitary rules. Can you speak to that in terms of our relationship with Japan? Are there any problems with regard to those rules in our trading relationship?
None at the present moment. I think there has been some discussions from time to time during our pre-consultations, but we get those things sorted out ahead of time, and we let science prevail. So there hasn't been any lately, to my recollection, for quite some time.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. When we signed the CPTPP a few years ago, at that point since then, have our exports increased to Japan? And do you believe we can still increase these exports even more?
Great question. Really, what CPTPP did was level the playing field between us and Australia, our main competitor. So it didn't really impact. It really allowed us to hold our own during that period of time. But lately, over the last number of years, our Japanese market share has gone down because we've had a weak crop or two in the last 5 years or so. However, in terms of expanding that market further, we got Australia competing with us, but on the other hand, we also have the Japanese population declining and getting older. And that's a long-term signal to us that I don't know if there's much opportunity to expand because they just don't have the people to consume
Thank you very much. On to Mr. St. Marie for 5 minutes, please.
Oui, merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And hello to our three witnesses. And thank you for your opening statements and for being here. Lots of content there. My question is for Mr. Sweeney. In the first hour, we received Mr. Kingston from the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association. He said with the Trump tariffs, building a vehicle in North America is more expensive than building one in Europe or in Asia, and I imagine in Japan. Would you agree with that? Is that the same issue for you?
Yes, the costs associated with building vehicles in North America and specifically in Canada have increased because of the tariffs, and it is not helpful for competitiveness.
Mm-hmm. À quel point est-ce que les...
At what point do the businesses you represent are integrated in the supply chains of Mexico and the U.S.?
Sorry, at what could you repeat the question? And particularly with the United States.
Mm-hmm. Mais ma question, c'était de savoir quel est le rôle.
I actually wanted to know what role the integration plays in the supply chain of building vehicles with parts from Mexico and the U.S.
It plays a major role, and when I think about both of our members, substantial componentry, particularly propulsion systems, and whether that's engines, transmissions, batteries, come from the United States. Right? We're PMAC members are major customers of automotive parts produced in the United States. And that's how they've organized supply chains, and that's how they've done it in a way that we can be so competitive in Canada, or until the tariffs, that we could be so competitive in Canada, and hopefully after the tariffs. And without those levels of integration, we don't know if we will achieve those levels of efficiency, productivity, and competitiveness.
OK, merci beaucoup. Donc, il est important d'avoir un nouvel accord commercial.
Thank you very much. So it's important to sign a new free trade agreement and that the U.S. remove the tariffs, even though he's made noises about the fact that they're here to stay. I'd like to hear you more about that and on the importance of having a trilateral agreement. Again, that would include the U.S. and Mexico.
Removing Section 232 tariffs is vital to the competitiveness of this industry, and frankly, to the industry in the automotive industry in the United States too. It would make sense to do that to improve everybody's competitiveness, especially as we have globally more engagement by companies that are non-market companies, non-market actors that are heavily state subsidized. And so I think the best way to do that is to do that as an integrated North American industry. Today, that's for PMAC members, that's primarily integration with Canadian parts and components, U.S. parts and components, to a lesser degree for PMAC members in Canada, Mexican parts and components, but there still is some important parts componentry coming into Canada from Mexico, just less than there is coming from Canada or coming from the United States. That has a lot to do with proximity.
Merci beaucoup, c'est très clair. Il me reste un peu
Thank you very
moins
much. That was a clear answer. I have a bit less than a minute left. The fact that Canada has critical minerals and rare and strategic minerals, to what extent is that an asset, an advantage for the companies you represent in the manufacturing business sector?
So I'm not as familiar with mining as I am with vehicle assembly. But there is a lot of opportunity there, and we know that they're not our members, but it's very public that there are a couple large Japanese companies that are exploring partnerships with some very exciting and reputable Canadian companies to source critical minerals. And my sense is that that might be a bit of a medium term or a longer term play, just considering how long it takes to bring mines online, and it would be opportunities that we would welcome exploring down the road as we continue to manufacture vehicles in Canada, and as a majority of those vehicles are electrified and require a larger battery, like a hybrid vehicle does.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. It's 1:12. We could do 2 minutes for Mr. McKenzie and 2 minutes for Mr. Fonseca, if the committee is okay with that. All right, 2 minutes, Mr. McKenzie.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Mr. Kennedy, I'm wondering if you believe that Japan would be a marketplace for additional exports of Canadian crude oil from our west coast.
Yes, thank you for the question. So at the moment, unfortunately, no. To my understanding, the refineries in the country are not equipped to use Canadian oil, the heavy oil that we produce. But that doesn't mean the door is closed. And I do think it's certainly an interest, and this conflict in the Middle East and the disruption it's causing on Japan's oil supply chain, about 90% of its crude oil comes from the Middle East, is forcing the government and the private sector to look at new options. So whether that leads to changes to the refineries and the capacity to bring on, I certainly think the interest is there, and it certainly would help to have further capacity to supply the market and other markets in Asia.
So one option may be for further refining to take place in Canada before a product is exported to Japan that would be capable of going directly into its existing refinery network. An alternative would be to add front-end coking or cracking in Japan. Either of those could allow a supply to Japan from Western Canada.
It's certainly worth a conversation with the government and the private sector.
And you noted AltaGas and indicated something that I echo as well, an outstanding Canadian company that is very quietly, perhaps in the Canadian way, perhaps in the Japanese way, just getting things done. I know there's a new facility to come online, shipping out of Prince Rupert, if I'm correct.
That's my understanding, and will hopefully lead to further exports to Japan and other markets. It's a great opportunity for Canada.
That liquefied petroleum gas is butane and propane.
That's my understanding.
Okay, thank you very much, Ms. McKenzie. Mr. Fonseca, please.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our three witnesses for their advocacy for our business relations with Canada and Japan. It gives me the opportunity to highlight the great city of Mississauga. I represent a riding in Mississauga. Of the 250 largest companies, Japanese companies here in Canada, over 100 plus are located in Mississauga. And why is that? That's because of the trust that was built between the city and Japan. We have a sister city, Korea, Japan. And hearing the witnesses, Madam Chair, what I heard about was trust and partnership and the ability to rely on a trusted partner. And so we have with the CPTPP as a foundation. Prime Minister Carney and Prime Minister Takashi recently launched the Canada-Japan Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. Within that partnership, now building on the CPTPP, where do you see kind of the opportunities? Where do they lie in terms of our economic growth and also foreign direct investment, like we've seen in the auto sector and other sectors by Japan? I'll go to Mr. Kennedy, please, to shed some light on that.
Well, thank you for the question. And I think, frankly, there are many areas of opportunity, but two that really stand out. I think that's in terms of mutual interest, the energy sector, and really this covers all varieties of energy, tremendous opportunity to collaborate. Some of that work is already taking place, but the brand new opportunity for Canada, and I know there'll be some focus on this on the upcoming Team Canada mission, and that's in the defense space. And I think there's a real alignment between Canada and Japan around what we're trying to do domestically to build capacities, looking for new partnerships. So there's a tremendous opportunity to form those relationships, to see how we're working with others, in aerospace and shipbuilding and so on and so forth, cybersecurity. So it's a really exciting area for growth and hopefully an area where we can find ways to build new economic partnerships.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll just say thank you to Mr. Sweeney for the manufacturing, and we do recognize just how important the Japanese manufacturers, especially here in Ontario, is Ontario Liberal government that actually brought in Toyota and Honda and developed those industries in the partnership with Japan, so that they make up 77% of the vehicles now that are manufactured in the province of Ontario are actually Japanese vehicles, and they do a magnificent job. And why has that growth been there? Because of the efficiency of those plants, the productivity, the workers that are there. And thank you very much for never having laid off a worker in all these decades of manufacturing in Ontario. We thank you for that, and we'll be at the table advocating to have a stronger auto sector here in Canada, of course, with our partners, the United States and Mexico through CUSMA. So thank you for that. And to Mr. White, just on canola, where do you see the value add? So where there's an opportunity still, I understand that the population may be going down in Japan, but where are there value add opportunities with canola within Japan?
A brief answer, Mr. White.
Okay. They're stable, they're there, so that's very, very important, but we need to augment our port infrastructure, our railways, and our labor, because service is top-notch, and that's one of our important customers. We need to keep them happy, and they notice when we don't deliver on time. We need to be a reliable supplier.
Apologies for the delay. Meeting adjourned.